In this Q&A, I'll answer 5 questions. First, how do I identify the right data to answer my HR analytics questions? Second, how do I scope the resources needed for the initial HR analytics project? Third, what are the costs of HR analytics implementation? Fourth, why is HR analytics not fully adopted yet? And fifth, how do I keep my HR analytics projects small? The first question, how do I identify the right data to answer my HR analytics question? And that's a very good question, because when you start with an HR analytics project, you want to select the right data. That's a big part of HR analytics. Big question is, how do I find that data? How do I know that for turnover I need to get some demographic data like someone's age, someone's sex, but also the travel distance, for example. Why for absenteeism you might have to select some very different data. And for job classification, you need yet another data set. How do I find that data? And the easiest and only answer is look at scientific literature. For example, if you take the example of turnover, you see that a lot of analyses since the 1930s have been done on why people leave their company. And what you see that in recent years, since the 2000s, a number of meta-analyses have been conducted that analyze all those research papers and basically make a selection of the relevant variables that influence the likelihood of someone leaving the company. Now, if you look for that literature and you find those meta-analyses, you'll have 2 or 3 of those studies. They list all the significant factors that contribute to the likelihood of someone leaving their company. If you compare that list with the list of available data you have in your company, you can basically make the right selections and see, hey, this data I have, this data I don't have, and you select the data that you have. And this kind of data will include things like travel distance, someone's gender, someone's age, someone's tenure slash time on the job, someone's kinship responsibilities. Higher responsibilities is a lower chance of leaving because you just can't take the risk. Someone's marital status, which is related to kinship responsibilities, etc., etc., etc. So the quick and easy answer is dive into literature, see what the literature says about, for example, absenteeism, about job classification and rewards, about the likelihood of someone leaving a company. Depending on your analytics question, dive into the research, look what the researchers have written about the specific topic that you're researching, and then use that research to identify the data and the variables that you need. Second question, how do I scope the resources needed for the initial HR analytics project? And this is in line with Kotter's article, How Do I Create Small Wins? And again, that's an excellent question. And the answer to the question really depends on your initial HR analytics project, of course. If you look back, for example, to the video lectures on HR reporting, there's a big difference whether you're starting with a project where you say, hey, I want to get my HR reporting straight, compared to when you say, I'm going to predict employee turnover. And then second, the size of the project is also really important. If you say, hey, I'm just going to use demographic variables to see if I can get an indication of someone's likelihood to leave, that's a much smaller project than when you say, I'm going to create a flight risk score and see if I can make predictions about who is most likely to leave and who is least likely to leave. So your specific analytics question is really important in scoping the resources needed to complete the HR analytics project. And it's the same for reporting. If you start with automated HR reporting, do you just start with 1 or 2 source systems, or do you immediately want to combine 10 source systems? And depending on the size of the source systems, your project can be either much larger or much smaller. So scoping the resources needed for the initial analytics projects requires you to write down, what is my project going to be like? What is the data that I'm going to select, which we talked about in the previous question? And how hard will it be to get this data? And once you have this data, how hard will it be to clean this data? And then usually the analysis is not the hardest part because that's just running the analysis, but getting the data right, massaging the data in order to get it right for analysis, that's where all the time goes into. So if you can answer those few questions and you can write down the answers, how hard will it be? Will it be very simple or will it be very hard? Depending on your answer, you can get quite a good grasp on the scope of the resources that you need for the initial HR analytics project. Third, What are the costs of HR analytics implementation? This question is really in line with the previous question, because your cost of implementation really depends on what you want to actually implement. Because HR analytics, it can be different things for different companies. So when you say, hey, I'm going to start with data-driven HR and I'm going to do that by automating my HR reporting, that doesn't really require you to bring in a data scientist and very advanced analytic skills. It just requires you to manage your HR data department well, maybe even buy some new software, and then automate your reporting. That's a very different project with much lower costs compared to when you want to do a complicated predictive analytics, etc. So your cost of HR analytics implementation, again, depends on what you want to implement, how technically advanced this implementation is, and this also goes for the previous question. When you want to do predictive analytics, you probably need a data scientist, and that brings a lot more costs with it compared to when you just want to automate your HR reporting, for example. It depends on the scope of the project, the number of variables that you include. It's basically in line with the previous answer. Depending on the scope of your project will also influence the cost of your HR analytics implementation. And the best thing to do is to make a checklist of the factors that I just mentioned at question 2 and say, hey, how difficult is this and what are the costs and the effort involved in this project? When you talk about the number of hours that are required from IT, from your data analysts, etc., make an estimation of how much time it will take you to aggregate the data and to clean the data, and that will help you in calculating the number of hours you need to get from HR data, from IT, from your data analysis department, etc. So use that same checklist to make an estimation of the number of hours that you need to spend on your project. Next question, why is HR analytics not fully adopted yet? And additionally, is HR analytics a fad or a hype? This is an excellent question. The big answer is HR analytics is not necessarily a new discipline, but it's getting a lot of traction these days because of a few things. On the one hand, HR data is becoming more and more structured. On the other hand, data warehousing is a big trend that's coming up, and in line with data warehousing, a lot of different departments, for example, finance, marketing, etc., are looking at their data, are starting to play with their data, and are getting great insights from their data. And that's where the big data and data analysis and machine learning movement comes from. And these are all buzzwords that are really hyped right now. In addition to this, you see that finance is not just looking to financial data anymore, but finance is starting to look around and say, hey, we also have an HR department with a lot of data. Let's look at their data. And in line with this, you see the HR analytics movement coming up saying, hey, we as HR should take a look at our own data. It shouldn't be finance who's looking at our data. It shouldn't be marketing. No, we should look at our own data. And that's where the HR analytics trend fits in. And this also explains your question, is HR analytics a hype? HR analytics is an upcoming phenomenon, and depending on how HR is able to adopt and able to pick up this data analysis discipline called HR analytics, HR will either succeed into creating an HR data analytics function, or when they don't, it will probably fail and it is a fad. In conclusion, there's a lot of interest in HR analytics. And the HR analytics movement is struggling because there's not a lot of information yet on, hey, how do we actually do HR analytics? Because we have a lot of people talking about it, but not a lot of people saying, hey, this is how you do it. This is how you start a project. This is how you get your reporting right. And this is how you implement HR analytics within your company. So the lack of adoption is first of all the early stages HR analytics is still in. Second, information that's missing. And third, a third factor is that there are not enough skilled people who can actually implement and start up an HR analytics department within a company. And in addition to this, there's also a big demand for HR data scientists, and there's simply not enough of them. That's the third factor of why HR analytics is not yet fully adopted. And to answer the question, is HR analytics a hype? I would say yes and no. Every hype has a stable underpinning that's growing and growing during the hype, and the hype may die down a little bit. But let's face it, when you're in an HR department and you don't have any operational reporting, about your people. You don't know your headcount. You don't know. You know that 10% of the people are leaving, but you don't know whether these people are performing well or performing really, really badly. This is just basic data, and whether HR analytics is a hype or not, this is data you need to get straight, period. So in conclusion, HR analytics is a necessity for almost all companies. Final question, how do I keep my HR analytics project small? There's multiple ways to do this. One of the things to keep in mind, and it also goes back to the previous questions, is agile HR analytics. For example, say, hey, I'm going to spend 2 weeks on figuring out the business question, 2 weeks on getting all the data, 2 weeks on cleaning the data, 2 weeks on the reporting. Once I'm done with that period of 2 months, I'm going to see, hey, what are my learnings and what am I going to do next in order to get more information and to do this process in a better way. So just giving yourself time constraints is a first way to do this. In terms of the problem that you're tackling, first of all, make sure it's easy to analyze, it's relevant for the business, it has a clear stakeholder, and it provides actionable insights. So start with the low-hanging fruit, a topic that's strategic and it has business impact. And it's relatively easy to solve. Second, focus on your key personnel. Don't include all personnel in your first analysis. 20% of your people represent probably 80% of the income or the revenue in your business, or they are your front office personnel, so they make the biggest impact on your net promoter score. Focus on these people. As I already mentioned, use small amounts of data and use a limited set of variables and try to really focus on the agile style of HR analytics. Set yourself a limit, 2 weeks to find out your business problem, 2 weeks to gather the right data. That can be interviewing people, that can be going to IT and getting the data, 2 weeks analyzing your data, 2 weeks reporting on the results and communicating it back to the business. Take your learnings, because you'll probably mess the process up and learn a lot, and then you do it again and you have your first successful analysis. So keep your project small by focusing on a specific problem, focusing on a specific target group within your company, and focusing on a small set of data and variables.